Well, good morning. It's good to see each of you here. And we're at the 8th chapter of Genesis. But The Flood in Modern Science is the title of the lesson today. And it occurred to me there are people who don't get excited about science. I've never understood that. But I have a few words for you if you're one of those people. Well, let me give background. I was a pretty much of a skeptic in my teenage years. Thanks to attending a biology class in a public school, I lost my faith, became a secret closet atheist. Ashamed of that, but God was merciful to me. And later on, I discovered that real science screams the reality of God. But science has always been very interesting to me. God has revealed himself in several ways. The primary way is in his word, the scripture, the words of the prophets and the apostles. But God has also spoken to us through his natural revelation, the world. That's where we're going to start out this morning. Rather than on the very first page of your handout, we're going to start out with like page 3, looking at the natural revelation. So you don't have a lot of things to fill in this morning. You're welcome to take notes and scribble as much as you want. But the Bible tells us in Psalm 104, which is one of my favorite psalms, because Psalm 104 is this beautiful description of God's natural world. And to me, it really stands out. But verse 24 says, O Lord, how manifold are thy works. In wisdom hast thou made them. All the earth is full of thy riches. So we're going to talk about the flood from a scientific point of view. And you need to know this. Even if you don't like science, if you do love science, you're going to love this. But if you don't, not science, you need to know that the natural world proclaims the reality of the flood, the Genesis flood. The evidence is abundant. It is everywhere. We have been conditioned not to see it. We are like the blind men who can't see what they're tripping over, but it is there, everywhere, all around us, and I hope you'll see that. 2 Peter 3 says, For of this they are willfully ignorant, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water, and then the land up above the water, and in the water, surrounded by water, whereby, that is the water, the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. The world, that is the natural, biological world, perished. But mankind, even in Peter's day, were willfully ignorant of that fact, and today, most definitely so. Jesus said, For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, expecting life to go on just as I always had, until the day when Noah entered into the ark, and they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. And likewise, it's going to be when Jesus returns again. People are going to be unaware, but it's going to come, terrible things are going to come upon mankind who are alive and without Christ at the second coming. So the topic right now, this Sunday, and I want you to hang on to that handout. We'll probably be using it next Sunday for chapter 8. But so hang on to it, and we'll fill in the blanks probably next Sunday. But today, the main topic is the flood and modern science. So just to jump right in, the Genesis flood provides the only rational explanation for Earth's layers of sedimentary rock. They tell us about 3/4 of the surface of our planet is sedimentary rock. That means rock formed by materials deposited in water. We're all familiar with sediments if you've seen the sands on the beach or along your local river. But most of our crust of our earth, the part we walk on, that we see with our eyes is sedimentary rock. Some places it's over a mile thick. Where could it have come from? The Genesis flood is the only rational explanation. This is my hometown, Farmington, New Mexico. We're looking southeast across the part of the city there. Those bluffs there are over 300 feet high, solid coconino sandstone. This is not being created anywhere today. Where did it come from? How did it get there? Now, I'm standing up on the airport, which is a mesa. They call it the SS Farmington because it's like landing on a battleship when you come in on a plane. But I'm looking across. The part I'm standing on, taking this picture, is nothing but piles of river cobbles, round river cobbles, hundreds and hundreds of feet deep, high. Where did that come from? I mean, down there by the bluffs, there's a San Juan River, and of course, like all the rivers in this part of the country, it's all, the bed is all cobblestones, round rocks. They're all rounded because of the rolling action in the bottom of the riverbed. But hundreds of feet high on my side, where did that come from? Well, obvious answer is, at one time there was a vast amount of water flowing through here. First of all, something deposited huge amounts of sandstone. The coconino sandstone, by the way, this extends from Arizona and New Mexico all the way up to the Canadian border. It's not visible everywhere, but many places you find it visible. Much of southwestern Utah is visible, and southeastern Utah, southwestern Colorado, and certainly around where I grew up. Vast, huge cliffs. The Indian cliff dwellings, Anasazi built their homes in this. It's everywhere. It covers an area of hundreds of thousands of square miles. Where did you get hundreds of thousands of square miles of sand that solidified into stone, hundreds of feet thick? Here's the goosenecks of the San Juan. This is not too far from where I grew up. This is for 22 miles, the San Juan River, the same river that flowed beneath the bluffs that you saw in the previous picture. It's for 22 miles, it's flowing through what they call incised meanders. The river meandered, instead of cutting its banks left and right like rivers normally do, it cut straight down through solid rock 1,000 feet deep. This picture was taken from a viewpoint on the north side. Right there in the middle foreground, you see sort of a pinkish area. Those little green specks, those are trees. Give you some idea of the height here. But that's the San Juan River. Right here, it covers, the river flows for 5 miles. For every 1 mile it gains, going from east to west. There's Canyon de Chelly over across the border in Arizona. More coconino sandstone. That's Spider Rock in the foreground there. That's where the Spider Woman lived up on the top, according to Navajo lore. Anyway, these cliffs are hundreds and hundreds of feet high of pure sandstone. Some of you may have been to Mesa Verde National Park in southwestern Colorado. Here's one of the cliff dwellings there. Solid coconino sandstone. Where did it come from? And not only do we have these vast sandstone deposits, and not just in the U.S., by the way. They occur in many places around the world. The Institute for Creation Research has done a lot of study using the core samples that oil companies have created, doing core sampling around the world. At the time that Dr. Timothy Cleary wrote his book, which I have, they had only had access to core samples from North America, South America, and Africa. What they did show was that there's this clear pattern of different kinds of sediments all laid down at the same time with identical geographic or chemical signatures around the world. At the same time they're being laid down in North America and Africa and South America, the same thing. All around the world, and lately the news is that as they're obtaining core samples from Asia, the same thing. The same sequence of sandstone and shale and limestone and so on laid down in the same order around the world. Where did it all come from? What? Obviously, some incredible event in the past had to have done this. There's the Dover Cliffs of England. This is a kind of limestone. It's a very soft kind called chalk, but hundreds of feet thick. How did it get there? What made it? Only the Genesis flood gives an actual rational answer for this. Many parts of the world, the limestone has been eroded underground by water. This is a view of Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico. We have limestone caverns here in South Dakota. They're plentiful in Tennessee, Kentucky, other places around the country. What created these? Nowhere in the world today do we see river silt, sand dunes, clay beds, etc., turning into solid rock. What could have made this happen in the past? There is a rational answer why hundreds and hundreds of feet thick of lime were deposited all at one time, containing the shells of ocean creatures, seashell creatures and things like that. We know these things were created during the time that life existed on earth. What did that? Genesis flood provides the only rational explanation for fossils, speaking of fossils. Now, when animals die today, they never turn into fossils. Why not? Well, they just decay. You know, a fish dies, what happens to it? Well, the body floats up to the top of the water until it finally rots and parts sink to the bottom. On the bottom there are scavenger creatures that eat any detritus that lands on the bottom of the lake or the sea or whatever, and it's all gone. There's nothing but just soft ooze down there at the bottom of the oceans. No fossils being formed. Here are some fish fossils. What's really interesting about these particular fossils is each one of these fish has a fossil fish inside. In other words, they were rapidly buried. The fish had no time to digest its meal before it was buried in something that turned into solid rock. The one on the bottom there, that on the left, that twisted position shows that this fish was definitely in distress when it got rapidly buried by whatever formed the rock around it. This does not happen today. Fish are not being buried anywhere, but we find around the world fish buried by the thousands, by the fossil fish, by the millions, everywhere. What happened? What caused that to happen? This is a Dinosaur National Monument, Colorado. That photo is not tipped. This is actually a slanted hillside with dinosaur bones sticking out everywhere. All kinds of dinosaurs that should not normally be together, plant eaters and meat eaters, all swept together by water action and piled in a heap over 100 feet high, buried in this clay that entombed them. The flesh rotted, disappeared, but the bones are still there, visible. What? This sort of thing can't happen. What swept whole herds of dinosaurs together into one small spot and then buried them and left just the bones? About vertebrate fossils. They estimate there's 800 million of them in the Karoo Formation of South Africa. I've never been there, but I accept this. They say there's more than 1 billion fossil herring in the Miocene shales of California. There are fossils everywhere. Fossils are abundant. You know, I have found fossils myself. You know, just the ocean. I've never found a dinosaur, but you know, shells. Some of you cracked open a rock maybe and found a seashell inside. All around us are rocks with fossils in them. No, not granite rocks, but and that's what most of the rocks are around here. But there are places where you can live like I did, where you find petrified trees, where I grew up, petrified trees and all kinds of fossils and things. Now note this, only seafloor creatures are found in what the evolutionists call the oldest limestone. Why? Because if the flood happened as the Bible described, what was the first thing buried by these sediments being swept by these underwater tsunamis? The seafloor creatures. And the evolutionists say, oh, see, it started with these little seafloor creatures, then they evolved into the higher and higher things that we find in the higher and higher strata. No. The difference in the mobility of the creatures found based on the higher strata is simply that mobile creatures could escape the floodwaters longer. And as I made the point, sea creatures today, when they die, they don't turn into fossils on the ocean floors. Also, the Genesis flood, and I'm rushing, there's so much we could share that I got to rush. The Genesis flood provides the only rational explanation for the origin of coal beds. All around the world we find coal beds in various places, like Wyoming, for example. There are coal beds in San Juan County, where I grew up. Indians would go and get that coal to take home to their homes and hogans and burn it there. They are never observed forming naturally. Now, the evolutionary explanation is that these are all swamps and the decayed material somehow turn into coal, but that doesn't actually happen in swamps. They appear on all continents. Sometimes these beds are up to 100 feet thick with overlaying layers of sandstone or limestone. They extend for miles. How did they get there? This is back to San Juan County. Here's one of the big coal mines that fuel the big Four Corners power plants there. Those are huge. That's a bad photograph, I realize, but I took it. But those are huge, huge machines. That big dragline scoop thing, that's like the white part there is 4 stories high. Okay, those big machines down there at the bottom, those tires are like 8 feet in diameter. They are huge. But my point is that there are these huge coal beds. Now, this is strip mining here. They remove the overlaying overburden, and then there's between layers of rock, there's layers of nice bituminous coal that makes good fuel for power plants, enough to keep Los Angeles lit for a couple hundred years. Now, wood and plant materials normally rot quickly underwater. So what could have turned vast forests into thick coal beds? Well, obviously something moved whole forests into certain locations and then covered them over with a layer of sediment and then moved another forest over and then covered that over with another layer of sediment. What caused that to happen? By the way, that's a picture of a coal hauler in Wyoming. I just threw that in there just so you can see how big these things are. I think that's cool. Another thing, the Genesis flood provides the only rational explanation for the origin of petroleum deposits. Where does petroleum, natural gas, crude oil, where does that come from? It's not producing anywhere today. Why are there these huge deposits of crude oil and natural gas scattered all around the world? We've all seen oil field pump jacks pumping that crude oil up from thousands of feet down underneath the ground. How did it get down there? Obviously, it didn't trickle down there because it's under great pressure. It wants to come up. When you drill a borehole, a lot of times you get a gusher. The oil just comes spouting up. Here's the back of an oil field, North Dakota. Where does all this oil and natural gas come from? There's the point. Natural gas and crude oil is under great pressure from thousands of feet underground. How did it get trapped beneath impermeable rock lying above it? Only the Genesis flood provides any kind of rational answer. Here's a diagram. There's your pump jack up on the top, and then drop an imaginary thousands of feet down, and you have this pool of oil with a natural gas above it underneath impervious rock. How did it get there? We do know that oil and gas are organic compounds. That means they're produced by living matter. How did living matter get underneath rock thousands of feet deep. Only the Genesis flood could explain something like that happening. The Genesis flood, folks, was not like you see in children's books and things like that. It was the most cataclysmic, the most catastrophic thing by far that ever happened in the world's history. The earth's crust buckled and moved, and the oceans rose, and the rain fell, and the earth was underwater, maybe in many places over a mile deep. And underneath, as the earth's crust was moving, kind of like the crust of your cherry pie when it's baking in the oven, going this way and that way, parts of it here and there. And this was causing vast, huge movements of underground tsunamis, water, grinding away rock, turning into sandstone or shale or clay deposits or whatever, and dumping it hundreds of miles away. And we see the evidence all around us. For example, here in South Dakota and northwest Iowa, where I live, there's this wonderful topsoil, but it's only like a foot or two deep. Beneath that is this yellow, sticky clay for I don't know how many feet deep. Clay is a waterborne deposit created by movement of water. And it extends around here for hundreds of miles. 100 times 100, you're talking 10,000s now of square miles of this stuff. What could have produced it? What rolled all these boulders across, that we find? Boulders that have a mineral signature identical to what's over in the Appalachians. How did it get here? Something immense caused this, brought this about. It is not, uniformitarianism cannot explain it at all. The Genesis flood does. So I ask, what natural processes could have formed and emplaced these fossil fuels? I mean, what processes we see going on today could have done it? Impossible. Then the Genesis flood provides the only rational explanation for many noteworthy geographical features, such as the Grand Canyon. I've been there a few times. But if you go there, anybody here been to the Grand Canyon? Oh, lots of you. Great. You see alternate layers of sandstone, shale, limestone, etc., not necessarily in that order, but they're stacked on top of each other in horizontal layers in smooth contact. Smooth horizontal contact without any erosion occurring between deposition. And about 4,000 feet deep. The whole canyon is over a mile deep, but the first 1,000 feet are what they call basement rock, just granite, the foundation rock, not sedimentary rock. But there's about 4,000 feet worth of sedimentary rock there. See the different colors showing different origin. Now, the limestone came from one part of the continent, and the sandstone came from another part, and the shale came from another part. As the earth's crust tipped this way and that way, and these turbid underwater currents carrying all of this clay or sand or lime or whatever, left these huge deposits there that extend not just in this one picture you see here, but for hundreds of miles north and south, as well as east and west. What could have done that? You notice, you can see maybe in the photo how they're laid down in even layers, and the layers on the north rim, 15 miles away, match the layers on the south rim. They're all single layers. And it's a wonderful experience if you ever get a chance to hike through the Grand Canyon and see this for yourself. These layers are stretched horizontally for thousands of square miles. This is Marble Canyon. This is a tributary to the Colorado River before it reaches the Grand Canyon. What I just want you to see here is, if you've ever seen a place where a dam broke and suddenly drained the lake, this is what it looks like. Obviously, there was a great lake. This is obviously aerial photo from an airplane flying thousands of feet above. But those cliffs over there are probably hundreds of feet high. But you see how the water began to drain, and then began to drain off this flat area, and then drop down into the main canyon. That sort of formation can only be created by a sudden, like a dam breaking. And creationist geologists say there was a dam that broke that formed the Grand Canyon. And there was much of the southwest around Utah, New Mexico, Arizona was a big old lake shortly after the flood that broke and formed the Grand Canyon and this Marble Canyon. You see I just want you to see the bands here this is all water deposited in these level bands. This doesn't happen today. Only something totally catastrophic on the scale of the Genesis flood could have possibly formed this. And this is everywhere in the part of the world that I grew up in. Hiked it, climbed it, all over the place. Notice there's no surface erosion between one kind of rock and the next. This indicates that all of them were deposited in less than 1 year's time. Any other explanation is irrational. Genesis flood provides the only rational explanation for the starting age of the oldest living trees. Now, we can do, using dendrochronology, we can measure the age of very ancient trees and trees that have, like the redwoods, the sequoias that are on the ground that aren't living anymore. Well, we can pinpoint what year they started growing. Guess what? There is no tree found anywhere in the world, even the old bristlecone pines in California and the giant sequoias, they've never found a tree yet that started growing before the proposed date of the Genesis flood. They all started growing since then. This is just explaining tree ring chronology. This is how they date the Anasazi ruins around northwest New Mexico and in southwest Colorado and so on. Rainfall moisture varies from year to year, and trees grow faster or slower depending on how much moisture they get during the year. This creates a variation in the tree rings. And so the archaeologists can match up, I don't know if you can see read the dates from where you're sitting, but that one on the bottom started growing in the year 1798, and then rings from the year 1871 match with the rings, the beginning of the wood section above it, which started growing in 1871, and so on. This is how they date the Indian cliff dwelling ruins and things like that to the exact year, or at least the exact year the Anasazi cut that tree down to make for the rafters in their buildings. Now these trees, like the giant sequoias and bristlecone pines, they don't seem to die naturally. They can live forever. But they never found anyone that's older than the date of Noah's flood. That's family pictures of when we used to live in California close to Yosemite. That's my dear wife. Back before they cared about such things, the early pioneers thought it was cool to make a tunnel through this tree where they could drive their Model Ts through it. Just a typical gigantic sequoia. The Genesis flood provides the only rational explanation for archaeological evidence for the beginnings of agriculture and civilization. Now, there are dates for Egyptian kingdoms that go back older than the date for the flood, but those are all based on mythological stories that the Egyptians left. The hard evidence for the actual Pharaoh dynasties starts after the date of the Noah's flood. There are these folk legends of older kingdoms, but that's not the same thing as hard evidence of any civilization on earth today older than the flood. Now, carbon-14 evidence is often cited for older histories. That's based on the assumption that the rate of carbon-14 production has never changed. now I'm going to try to explain this. When our atmosphere is constantly being bombarded by cosmic rays, which can turn nitrogen, which has atomic number 14, into carbon-14 by kicking out a proton from the nitrogen. Changes into carbon-14. Carbon-14 is a radioactive isotope with a half-life of about 5,700 years. So you find some, and all living things use carbon. We breathe, we eat carbon-based materials, we inhale carbon dioxide. All plants need carbon dioxide to live and to grow and to grow themselves. So all trees, the carbon in them has the amount of carbon-14 that was in the air at the time that tree was alive. After the tree dies, it's not absorbing any more carbon-14. And the carbon-14 begins to decay at this rate of a half-life of 5,700 years. So an archaeologist can take a core sample from a roof beam in an ancient dwelling that he finds in New Mexico, and he can send it to a lab, and they can figure out how much carbon-14 is in it, and based on the amount that's lost, they can say this died approximately in such and such a century, and they can date things that way. Now, things like coal, natural gas, crude oil have they're organic, carbon-based. They have carbon-14 signatures that make them seem really old, like millions of years old. And so the evolutionists jump on that and say, see, here's proof that these things are millions of years old. It's a problem with that, though. The problem is that carbon-14 is only produced under the conditions that exist in the world as we have it today, post-flood. There is very good reason, many scientists believe, that carbon-14 was not being generated in living things before the flood. If that's true, then anything that grew before the flood or shortly after the flood would appear far older than its actual age. Well, maybe we'll get into that here a little bit more, but I want to move on to the next thing is the Ice Age. There was only one Ice Age. The flood provides the only rational explanation for that. Start off, there is much evidence that much of Canada, the north, the Great Lakes area, and the parts of South Dakota and North Iowa that have these lakes, like the Spirit Lake, Okoboji Lake over to the east of us. These parts were originally covered with ice, deep ice, a big, and that in such depth that the weight of it depressed the Earth's crust in those places, and when the ice finally melted and when the Ice Age ended, it left these nice lakes around our part of the world and especially Minnesota, places like that. Where did all that ice come from? Here's an artist's depiction of the Ice Age at its maximum extent. You may recognize on the right-hand side of the globe, that's the shape of Africa there. You can maybe make out the Mediterranean and Spain and the Arabian Peninsula on the far right there. Notice that the part of the world where civilization began, the Euphrates, Tigris valleys in Iraq, that was not ever covered with ice. Where the ark landed is a little white dot up there above that. That's not area, of course, like 16,000 feet elevation, 18,000 feet, something like that, was obviously covered with ice. Here's another diagram showing where the ice was. You can see a good part of North America, Canada, was covered in ice. The brown part, now because of so much of the Earth's water came down as precipitation that stayed in the form of ice, the ocean levels were much lower thousands of years ago. I mean, even evolutionists agreed to this. And so there were land bridges between many parts of the world where you can't get except by swimming or by boat today. The question is often asked, how did all those marsupials get to Australia after they left the flood? Well, they walked because after the flood, the oceans were not that deep, and actually there was a land bridge between Southeast Asia and Australia. And for some reason, more marsupials than anything else chose to go to Australia. And in North America, the only marsupial we have here is the opossum. But anyway, I think this is really interesting, showing how migration was possible. There was a land bridge between Asia and Alaska, and this is how the ancestors of the North American Indians got here. Obviously, they share physical features with some of the more primitive peoples still living in North Japan. The Ainu look just like North American Indians. Some stayed there in Japan, while the more Asian-looking people began to move in and displaced those people. The people they displaced came across the Bering Straits down to North America and all the way down to South America. Started some civilizations there. Another aspect of the Ice Age is that we have these narrow valleys in the Rocky Mountains and the Sierra Nevada that show the obvious marks of past glaciers. In my hikes in the Rockies, north of where I grew up, you could see lots of places where on horizontal rock there are these deep, deep parallel grooves where the glacier in the past had dragged hard rock across the bedrock there and create all these grooves. You see it all over the Sierra Nevada in California. Obvious marks of past glaciers. Here's the U-shaped valleys of Yosemite. One feature of glaciers, when they melt, they leave behind a U-shaped valley. And nobody disagrees that the valleys of Yosemite were shaped by glaciers. Now, these big ice sheets are no longer here. We still have glaciers in places like the Alps and Alaska and South America, but they're very small now compared to what they used to be in the past. What does that tell us about climate change? Folks, there has always been climate change. It's always been changing. The Sahara Desert, underneath the sand, you find the ruins of ancient cities where people lived back when the climate was very different in North Africa, when people could graze cattle and raise crops. And gradually, that part dried up, grew drier, and they had to move away to other places. Climate's always been changing. All around the Four Corners area where I grew up, there are these Anasazi Indian ruins, Mesa Verde and Hovenweep in Colorado, and I used to dig up Indian pottery in my garden, for Pete's sakes, in Farmington, New Mexico, all the time. The San Juan Valley there supported a population of Indians, they believe, that equal to about the population of people living there today. But around 1100, the earth went through, that part of the world went through a climate change, and they couldn't, and the crops failed. They began raiding each other's food supplies. It became very chaotic. They built these defensive structures up in the cliffs and things like that. And finally, the survivors moved down into the Rio Grande Valley, where we still have lots of different Indian pueblos today. Climate's always been changing. The Genesis flood provides the only rational explanation for similar flood stories preserved in folklore around the world. The Navajos had their myth. They believed that shiprock, it's Tsepetai in Navajo, that means rock with wings. They believed that their ancestors climbed aboard this to escape and a sprout of wings at the base and flew away and brought them here to northwest New Mexico. These are the Miao people in China, and I want to spend a little more time talking about them because these people preserved the creation story in their own language. This is an ethnic minority in China. It's also called Hmong, and there are lots of Hmong in Vietnam and Laos. We encountered them during the Vietnam War, but these are in China. They have their own customs. These are It's pronounced meow, just like a cat says, M-I-A-O. Here's some girls in their traditional costumes for a special occasion. Otherwise, they would look just like normal Chinese, Western civilized people. But they have this story. They have this unique custom of repeating the story of their ancestors every year at special gatherings. And because it's in the form of poetry, it's in kind of like the Psalms. Second line says about the same thing in a different way, so it's easy to remember. And they've been doing this for centuries. And they have the story of the creation and the flood still preserved in their language. I'll just skip down to the flood part here. This was translated by an American missionary about 100 years ago. So it poured 40 days in sheets and in torrents. Then 5 days of misting and drizzle. This is talking about the patriarch Noah with his sons Lohan, Loshan, and Jalu. It sounds kind of like Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And so it was just him and his wife and their 3 sons and their 3 daughters, according to their story. The waters surmounted the mountains and ranges. The deluge ascending leapt valley and hollow. An earth with no earth upon which to take refuge. A world with no foothold where one might subsist. The people were baffled, impotent, and ruined, despairing, horror-stricken, diminished, and finished. But the patriarch Noah was righteous. The matriarch Ga-Baluen upright. Built a boat very wide, made a ship very vast. Their household entire got aboard and were floated. The family complete rode the deluge in safety. The animals with him were female and male. The birds went along and were mated in pairs. When the time was fulfilled, God commanded the waters. The day had arrived, the flood waters receded. Then Noah liberated a dove from their refuge, sent a bird to go forth and bring again tidings. The flood had gone down into lake and to ocean. The mud was confined to the pools and the hollows. There was land once again where a man might reside. There was a place in the earth now to rear habitations, and so on. It sounds remarkably like the Genesis account. These people have preserved it in their folklore. Now, how is the physical? Oh, we are out of time. Or I'm sorry. Okay, this is where we're going to start next week, okay? And then we'll finish and get into the scriptures in chapter 8, Lord willing, next week. We'll talk about the scientific theories about how the physical planet was changed by the flood and its aftermath, the 2 main theories proposed by believers. And let's pray. Father, thank you for giving us this time together. Thank you, Lord, for all of the revelation we find in just the natural world around us, Lord. The evidence of landscape shaped by retreating floodwaters everywhere we see, Lord. The very ground we walk upon tells us that this world was once destroyed by a universal global flood. Now, Father, please increase our faith. Help us to be knowledgeable enough, Lord, to not be taken in by the lies of the unbelievers, but, Lord, help us to be able to maintain our position. Please bless us now as we dismiss from this room and regather in a few minutes for our morning service. Please bless it, Lord. May your blessings be upon us, for we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.